So the plan is to start with some opening remarks from each of the panellists on how they see this discussion, and then have some questions and discussion arising from that among the panellists. Then I'll be taking questions from you guys, the audience, so please do note down anything you would like to ask over the course of the discussion. I guess I don't know, we'll start from Rebecca, is that okay? Great, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lee. Yes, I am very much a practitioner on this panel. I was really keen to be involved with it because Beth asked me. I've been working with Beth, with Eden, on several of my projects. And actually the title of this, just the title itself, Common Ground, I think that is so important. I think there has to be very much a working together, a dialogue between all the different interest groups, the students, partners, and working with Rare Recruitment as well, with their amazing programme that they run, Target Oxbridge. I'm sure many of you will have heard of the programme. I can fill you in on details of what the university is doing at the moment and the projects and programmes that we are working on. I'm sure I'm not going to start with any of that detail, but more than happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. But I think fundamentally, the common ground and the discussion that we need to have to work this out as well, with the media as well, because I think the media play a part. It's not just institutional here, it is the connection that we can make in those discussions that we can have. It's very important.
Okay, thanks Rebecca. I'll just pick up on that issue of common ground. I could steal it from you. Yeah. My career has very much been involved in education. I did teach at state schools. That's how I got interested in education itself. So common ground, level playing field is difficult to create. I know from when I worked at Edexcel Pearson's, and apologies to anybody that's at any of the Edexcel exams in the summer. So it is difficult to create, but there are ways and means by which we can work together to help produce a level playing field, a common ground. And I'd like to explore some of those here today. The statistic that is part of the introduction, I think, is really, really interesting in terms of there are only 7% of students from the independent sector, but then 40% is what we're at in terms of Oxford's representation of students from the independent sector. If we could just widen that a little bit further, if you look at the sort of the grades that students get, if you look at that pool who get 3A plus grades for A-levels, that's made up of over 35% of independent sector students. That gives you a feel for what the attainment gap is like between state and independent. And that perhaps also reflects then how many then are successful in making applications to selective universities. So I think that's something worth us unpacking there. In terms of the state independent, that for me is not a good proxy for disadvantage and social mobility. I think there are other indicators we should be looking at to measure success in terms of how we do it. But it's a crude measure, and I know it's one that's used a lot, particularly in the media. What I'm interested in is what's Oxford's contribution towards levelling some of these unlevel playing fields that we do have in existence at the moment. And I can talk about contextual data that we use, the flagging systems that we use in the admissions process. And we not just are looking at them once they apply to us. There's a big piece of work, as Rebecca's already hinted, in terms of what we do with schools, with communities, to encourage people to think, yeah, actually Oxford's for me. It's not that elitist placed over there. But social mobility is a big challenge, and I don't think it's something that the HE sector alone can solve. It's something that we have to do in partnership with government and with schools and with communities as well. So I hope we can touch on some of those aspects as well. And from where I sit, I can do a lot of work with schools, etc. But I'm also very much interested in knowing what more the university can do. How can we turn that mirror on ourselves to to say, are we doing the right thing? How are we judging academic potential when it comes to looking for those who apply, and what more we can do?
What I should probably say at the outset is I'm not representing the Sutton Trust anymore. So I got involved in this panel just as I was moving from the Sutton Trust to Oxford. So I'm not really speaking for you. It's just a maverick here. What might be most useful, I think, is my previous panelists have introduced the issues very well. But I am going to give you some of what Selina calls crude statistics. So this is from some work I did at the Sutton Trust, which just gives you a little bit of context on the proportion of private school kids that enter the top of the professions, just to show this is about what the matter is if only a small number of schools are represented in places like Oxford. So looking at the judiciary, so this is High Court and Appeals Court, some 74% of those judges went to private schools. Some 74% also went to Oxbridge, and most of those would have been to both of those places. In terms of barristers, so these are Magic Circle law firms, I believe it's a little while since I did this, 71% of barristers at Magic Circle law firms went to, this would be partners, sorry, went to independent schools, private schools, and 55% went to Oxbridge. In medicine, I'm not going to go through all the samples, but in medicine, 61% people at the top of that profession went to private schools, and 40% went to Oxbridge. In journalism, 51% went to private schools, and 54% went to Oxbridge. In civil service, 48% went to private schools, and 51% went to Oxbridge. And obviously that's comparing to a student cohort overall where 7% of kids go to private schools. That's something that hints at that. That's different because 14% of sixth form students go to private schools, and some 33% of students getting straight A's go to private schools. So the 7% isn't necessarily a great comparator, but it does give you an indication on a societal level what's going on here. Okay, I might leave it there.
Okay. Right, we're being really short, aren't we? Okay. Hi, so just very quickly about, Centre for Labour and Social Studies, you might have realised the acronym is CLASS. So given that I run an organisation called CLASS, let me talk a little bit about CLASS in the broader sense. I think it's really important when we talk about Oxford and Cambridge numbers and who comes here to understand that in the context of what's been happening in society. So very simply, in 1979, this was a much more equal country, and the top 10% had incomes around 2 times as much as the bottom 10%. That is now 9 times as much. And so in that context where we've seen, and we know that at the very top, the top 10%, the top 1% in particular, have seen their incomes grow exponentially. So we know that the way in which inequality is playing out is making actually the 90% of us more equal, and if you're at the bottom, there's obviously still very big differences in outcomes, but still, and the top 10%. So understanding Oxford and Cambridge and kind of traditionally what we call elite institutions in that context, you realise how much work they have to do. So let me just talk a bit about class and how class has changed as well alongside those figures. So I think a typical idea of working class back in the day was a miner or someone working in a factory, and the labour market has fundamentally changed since then. And we know that there's a lot of precarious work, so 0-hour contracts, work in distribution, hospitality, low-paid work at the bottom, and those are sort of the new kind of working class jobs. What we've seen at the top, so I don't know how many of you would have seen the social class survey that was done a few years ago, and there's a book by Mike Savage that I would encourage you to read. And what he found is that in sort of the traditional ideas of class that there's these new kind of new classifications. But what's really important is the top elite percent that he looked at, so about 7% of the population. And one of the biggest defining factors of that was going to Oxford or Cambridge. So how important Oxford and Cambridge is to reproducing the class system is very, very clear. So I don't want to sit here and just blame Oxford and Cambridge. I know they've done a lot. They come at the end of a very unequal system that already makes it much harder for others. But what they do is, because unfortunately there's only so much they can do at the end of that system, they reproduce some of that purely because Oxford and Cambridge act as a funnel. So what we've heard there about how much of our judiciary, etc., went to Oxford or Cambridge means that the system is very unequal. That means it creates lots of barriers for people that aren't from high income backgrounds. So the people that then get into Oxford tend to be from more higher income backgrounds, and then they go on to earn more money. So it's this kind of inequality on top of inequality on top of inequality. And how you break that system, of course, isn't just about here. It's about, and it's not just about kind of school programs, it's about the larger collective movement for progressive change. And right now that looks like ending the cuts, that looks like what you do in terms of stopping grammar schools from happening, all of those things that we know, and addressing inequality more fundamentally in society are really important. Let me just highlight to you, as someone that studied here, that grew up in East London, how important, I know we spoke there a bit about how much Oxford and Cambridge graduates dominate a number of sectors. In representation, political representation, in my world of think tanks, literally the disconnect, the number of people that may well be well-meaning but have no idea what it's like to grow up on benefits, to be confronted with racism, they literally, despite being well-meaning and sometimes kind of signed up to the project, the fact that so few of those people that are representing us, whether it be in Parliament or elsewhere within the political system, even in the think tank world, makes a fundamental difference to what comes out in terms of policy. I mean, fundamental, I've just seen it around me. I've been on panels where they've spoken about, they speak about it like it's sort of second order, something happening very, very far away. They talk about political change as if, we can wait for the next time. In the meantime, right, we know what's happening to the NHS, we know what's happening to schools, we know that people are going to be permanently affected. So it's not enough to wait 5 years. So that's why it is that it's so important to have a more diverse Oxford and Cambridge university admission spaces, because literally you guys are so important then, because it funnels you into these jobs where we don't have representation right now, and it's fundamental to understanding why we have the policies that we do. And it was also interestingly watching the election coverage over the last few days, is these commentators that look dumbfounded by what's just happened, because they similarly are completely disconnected to what is happening on the ground. And I'll leave it there, but obviously there's lots more I can say later on.
Thanks. Firstly, I just want to say it's really great to be here at this event. I studied here until 2011, and I think if an event like this was happening then, it would have been very surprising. And it's wonderful to see that the university is in a place where people from the university, students, can talk very frankly and openly about these topics, and do so with the aim of talking about it in a positive way. So firstly, that's really great to see. Target Oxbridge was something that I was encouraged to set up when I graduated whilst working at Rare, because of some media coverage. Media was mentioned earlier. When I graduated, the story came out quite shortly afterwards that only one black student had been accepted to Oxford that year. I had just left. I'd been on the African and Caribbean Society committee before leaving. We had more than one member join us that year. I would have definitely known if there was only one member, but this is how things can end up in the media. They get misinterpreted, negative stories, sell papers, so that's what happened, and there was a storm about that. I, however, was really impacted by that, because as a mixed-race student with black heritage who'd been thinking about applying to Oxford a few years before, I knew how impactful those sorts of stories could be. Those were the sorts of things that made me even more worried and even more nervous about applying, sort of backed up the things that my friends and people at school were saying, oh, do you really want to go there? You will be the only black person from a state school who isn't from a privileged background. Are you going to have a good time there? I still did it, but it wasn't without concern. And Target Oxbridge was set up to try and bring something positive to that conversation. Roll forward 5 years, we're now working formally with Oxford and Cambridge, and very recently there was some very positive media coverage, following on from the photos of the black boys at Cambridge, and Oxford did their photo as well. And seeing that move forward suggests that all of these different groups working together, we are now able to have some positive representation in the media, and I think that's really key. In terms of the work that we do, we work directly with students to help them develop themselves to be able to get through this process. And our philosophy at Rare and Target Oxbridge is that these students have potential. What they lack is a social and cultural capital to get through processes, and it ties in a lot with what was being said earlier about inequality and about having access to things. And if the students don't understand the process, haven't grown up talking about the news around the table, haven't been doing debating, haven't been doing all of that, what we see is when they come to us, they are very bright, but they are not very confident. And that means when they get to an interview and somebody asks them a question that they weren't expecting, their instinct is to close down and say, I don't know. And the point is, you're not meant to know, you're just meant to be confident enough to think it through there and then. And everything we do is about encouraging them to sort of embrace the fact that they are good enough and they are bright enough, and that with practice they can do that. So I'll be talking from that perspective in terms of what I've seen is working well with students and what we could be doing more of. I'll be speaking about the fact that the earlier we intervene, the better, because if you can get students thinking about this sort of thing earlier on and making the right decisions, they've got a bit less to catch up on once they actually make the applications.
Thanks everyone. Cool, so one thing that's been mentioned from a couple of different perspectives, and I guess it's a sort of headline of the talk, is about the different school types. What's been mentioned by Samina and Rebecca is that the types of the A-level grades that you're essentially able to get depend hugely on your school background. And obviously those A-levels are prerequisites for coming to Oxford. There are other aspects of Oxford admissions that have also been mentioned, and also policy that means that A-levels are the way they are, schools are funded the way they are, has been mentioned by Isa. So I suppose first big question, is this problem to do with educational inequality bigger than anything Oxford or Cambridge or any other universities can do anything to compensate for or tackle? Or is there more that we should be doing if it is something we can deal with? If anyone has any, wants to start? I think that was too big a question.
I can say something from that one. I guess Samina might want to say something. I can say something.
Sure, yeah. So,
Can we contend with it, I suppose, the way it is?
no, we can't. I don't think we can leave it as it is. I think there's an awful lot the university sector can do, and there's an awful lot the university sector is doing. But there are interventions that have an impact. There are others that are about raising aspiration and raising progression to selective university. I just would think like the Russell Group. How much we can raise attainment is much more challenging because there is a school system out there. We can support it, we can do curriculum enrichment, we can do summer schools, we can do residentials, we can do master classes, and all of that does go on, and Oxford does a lot of that, as well as the other selective universities. But in terms of changing and closing that gap in attainment at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 4-5 needs bigger interventions than what we're currently set up to do. There is movement towards, and you will have seen it in the Conservative Party manifesto, about more grammar schools. Is that going to change social mobility? There is also more that government would like university sector to do in terms of actually running schools. I'm not sure university sector is the best sector to run schools. I actually think teachers are pretty good at that themselves, and so are head teachers as well. And we have examples of where the sector has gone into running schools, and the schools have gone into special measures. So there are some not brilliant examples to draw on. The one very good example to draw on is the King's Maths School. So you probably have heard it's a very selective sixth form. It deals with maths and physics and a couple of other STEM A-levels. And it is selective in terms of you have to pass a test to get in. Now, we could set one of those up. Oxford could set one of those up. I'm at the moment reluctant to do that because I think, yet again, it will just be serving those who can get into a selective school, and that's perhaps not where we want to be. So I'm much more interested in knowing and working with communities and to work with the wider education sector to see what they need that university can run and do more of.
Yeah, I can say something quickly on that. Look, I think that often, there is more, and Samina talks about this obviously, but there's more that Oxford and Cambridge can do in terms of those programmes out but I think sometimes Oxford and Cambridge is scapegoated, like I say, for the whole system before it gets to the university system. And actually, I think the university sector in general should be getting more angry about that, and Oxford and Cambridge should get more angry about that, because they're not getting the best students right now. I mean, of course they're not. So they should be saying, when they do get the focus put on them, they should be saying, this isn't right, because you guys aren't investing enough in the public education system to make sure that we're getting the best students. Now, I know that there are issues around that for institutions to say because of political problems. And, you know, I've spoken to lead admissions tutors before at big university institutions, and they've said, look, we don't want to get political. So there's several things they can do. So one is they can hire the academics to say it for them. They can make sure they have people like Danny Dorling, who's here now, and some at Cambridge as well, that will say these things, and because they're not speaking for the institution and they do research on these things, but they are making the point, and they still have University of Oxford under their name. It's so powerful. Danny, I've known for a long time, but people like him, I use and get along to events all the time. So what they can do, kind of underlying those things if they feel like they can't say it publicly because they don't want to get in trouble in terms of looking too political. I mean, I think that's fundamental. The other thing they can do, when I did the Black PM show, that was completely reliant, I didn't go out and get the numbers myself, on Oxford University, who had published the admissions numbers by race and by state versus private sector. So I could use the numbers on the website, and we could use that in the program to demonstrate that there seemed to be something going on about where it was that when Black and Asian students were applying, they were less likely to get in than white students, which is completely contrary to, I don't know about others in the room. When I was here, I was made to feel so often that, you know, they let us in through the back door, but actually the numbers don't play out that way. So that was great. But the one thing that I would ask Oxford and Cambridge and other universities to do is not just do it by race, but to do it by income or class background as well. Because so often the people that are getting in from diverse ethnic backgrounds have also gone to private school, and that has allowed them to then jump that barrier. So we need to have, and with the state as well, they often put grammar in the same thing. So if you want to help us make some of these points for you, break down the numbers, and I know me and a zillion people, Certain Trust and others, you know, want to be able to say these things. So we need to, if we can get those numbers, I know it reflects badly because it looks like Oxford and Cambridge aren't taking in enough people from Black and Asian people or ethnic minorities from state school sector, but it means that we can shout louder about it, and it means that we'll see change over time.
Just to add a few points on the grammar school point. The students at I work with on top of Oxbridge, quite a few of them will make a move, and it's a similar move that I made. So they are at comprehensive schools for GCSE. They do very well there, they're one of the top performing students there, and then they move to a grammar school because they know that they want to aim for selective university, and their school has very limited history of doing that. So not all, but a lot of the students I work with have made that move. That comes with a lot of challenges. You're in a new school, sometimes you're moving to a school where it might be the first time that you're one of the few ethnic minority people in an environment for education, the teachers don't know you. So it's not an easy thing, but it means that they now have access to that sort of support that people need to do well in applying to selective universities. And when I tell people that I did that move, they often say to me, oh, so you must think that having more grammar schools would be great. And I will say no, because it shouldn't have been the case that I have to drag myself out of the comprehensive education system to afford myself the opportunity to come and study somewhere like this. So I think that is a shift that we should be aware of, that people do have to make that change, and there's something about enabling the comprehensive sector to provide that support and to know what it is that students need. And the advice that students need needs to start a bit earlier as well. So I often meet students who have made very, very poor A-level choices. They know what they want to do, they've had no one to inform that maths is essential for some courses, for example. I know students who want to study economics, no maths A-level, or they want to do a maths degree, no further maths A-level. And I have to deliver a hard message at year 12, year 13 to say this isn't really going to be so easy for you, and that should have come much earlier, preferably around the year 10 stage. So in terms of some things that you could do to intervene, if you can't have an impact on the quality of teaching, you might be able to have an impact on at least the quality of advice that's happening within schools. And then a final point, what we find with the programme is a lot of our students are maybe the only student in their school who's performing at their level, and they therefore have no support network within their school and within their friendship group. So when you are at the top of the pilot search, you're only getting so much pressure to perform at an even higher level. So for example, there's a big gap between ethnic groups when you're looking at the people who are getting 3A star to AA level, and black students are one of the lowest performers in that front, with 4.9% of them achieving that compared to 12.5% overall. So there is that gap, and some of that would be due to the school students you're in, but there's also something about how much is your social circle able to support you and push you to do that, and how much are you sort of able to coast because you're doing quite well. And the students who come into the programme find that having other students who are like them, who are aiming high, means that they've got people they can go and revise with, or they've got people who are also pushing that way. So instead of coasting and sitting with their, an ABB type result, they can actually feel that there's reason to be pushing. And one of the students said to us at the residential only a few months ago, "Why did you pick me?" And we said, "Well, we thought that you've got a lot of potential if you put the work in." And he said, "Okay, I think I'll get my head down. I'm going to try and push for these A's and A stars." So raising aspiration, but also giving people actual support so they know what they're aiming for, can give them that extra push to, even if they're on their own in their school, put the work in to get those top grades.
Phil, did you want to?
Yeah, that was quite nice, I think. So just on grammar schools, I mean, the only grammar schools can be a bit of social mobility, it's just complete rhubarb. I mean, there are 2% of kids that go to grammar schools or preschool meals, 2%, and that compares to, exactly something in the teens for the student cohort overall. I mean, I've no idea. I've got some friends that work in the DFB who have said that policy is purely come from number 10, and the DFB's been cut out of it massively. It's that classic thing of Theresa May went on grammar school, so it could be successful for me, they'll be successful for other people, but it's just, I should say I failed my grammar school entrance exam as well, so but I think, grammar schools will do nothing, they'll make it worse. You'll get selection by house price, you'll get all these other things, it's no good. Another thing that quite a few people have mentioned, and I'm always uncomfortable with, is this notion of aspiration. What on earth is aspiration? I can never quite pin it down. So I'm going to throw some more stats at you. 31% of the boys at Eton go to Oxbridge. 31%. That's 2014 figures, the last figures they have. If you go to Eton, you barely have to have any aspiration levels. I mean, it could be about middle. It could be middling. If you're a working class kid from a school that barely sends anyone to university at Rossenbrook, who's the first in their family to go to university, your aspiration level will have to be stratospheric, right? So I'm always very, and this is, the Tories have done this, but also the new Labour government did this, which is this notion of character education. And if we could just make poor kids want it more, or poor kids be more like rich kids in terms of how they're thinking about things, then everything will be okay. So I'm very reticent about that notion of aspiration. What do we mean by it? It's a very kind of nebulous term. I think it just gets used to hit poor kids over the head with a lot. I'm going to stop there, I think, Samir, maybe do you want to do something?
Can I just say on the aspiration part, aspiration is not limited to class. Everybody has aspiration. It's realising aspiration that's really important, I think. Many students at, your average state school that wants to go to Oxford and Cambridge, it's helping them to realise what aspiration is and how to make it happen. Whether it's information, advice and guidance, or helping them to choose the right A levels, it's that sort of thing. I think there's a big piece of work where HE allies can sort of provide that information. We do it, but it's also quite complex and to get hold of, and there's better ways of doing it. So I think that's really important. Other thing I just want to pick on is, I think race is really important, but what's even more important than that is race linked with disadvantage. So I'm very much interested in sort of working and looking at who's applying from different backgrounds, but who is also applying from areas of disadvantage, whether it's postcode or whether it's educational disadvantage, and the two go hand in hand. You can't, as I think sort of been said by the panellists, just focus on race and pick students from privately educated or very selective state schools. The challenge is bigger than that, and that's what we're trying to work on. And how we do that is to use data to help us to look at whether it's postcode data or whether it's school data, and then to contextualise that in terms of the admissions using flags. It's not a perfect system, but it at least shows and highlights those who've got their GCSEs in what really was quite a challenging school. But despite all of that, they had the aspiration and they've got the attainment as well to sort of flourishing, and that's what we should be looking at. And in terms of other things, I think you have to look beyond what the data is telling you. We get, we had last year 20,000 applications for 3,200 places. So we will always turn down very, very talented students who will go on and get A-level grades far beyond what we're asking them to do. What we're trying to do is to pick the very best from that pool. And I think it's if we just focus on what A-level grades people get, perhaps doesn't tell the full story. It's much more, I think Leonie hinted towards as well, about cultural capital. How can we provide that cultural capital? So if you're doing A-level English, for example, and you're applying to do English literature here, if you read Chester D'Urberville's, because it's on your A-level syllabus, and you know it inside out, you're absolutely hooked on it, it's not enough. You have to do much more outside of the classroom. So it's what more we can do to be the sharp-elbowed parents for these students who aren't getting that from home and aren't getting it from school as well.
Yeah, just one point. So on the aspiration point, I agree that it's a nebulous term, it's used a lot, it's not quite clear what people mean by it all the time. To narrow it down a little bit, when looking at schools and the way they think about their students, sometimes their expectations for their students are a bit low when it comes to aiming for university. So if a student from a school goes on to university, in some schools, regardless of what university it is, that's a win. And you can understand that if it's a school where not very many people are progressing, but sometimes that does mean that the teachers aren't necessarily pushing the students to look at universities like Oxbridge or selected universities. And I had a case of a student who, one of my friends who I knew from Oxford had taught at that school. She left the school before the student had applied to university, but had always said, oh, I have a student who I really think could aim for Oxbridge. And she'd encouraged her to do that. But once my friend left, the teachers sort of didn't encourage her to do that, sort of suggested, oh, maybe you should look elsewhere. That's quite a far thing to do. She still actually applied, she got to the interview and didn't get through. And then she was going off somewhere else. But she had that battle with the school, sort of not necessarily thinking she should go for it and put her neck out. My friend actually found out about this. She got really good grades, so we suggested that maybe she think about taking a gap year and reapplying. She did, came through the programme, and she's now studying at Cambridge. So schools can sometimes limit a student's aspiration. What we're thinking about is how high are they hoping to aim. And I think sometimes it's because schools are nervous, or they just think our students aren't going to get that far. So if we can make it clear to the teachers as well as the students that it's actually very possible for students like that to go on and study at universities like this, that might help.
Just really quickly, just thinking about across those things that we heard, it just at the micro level, the day-to-day, short-term level, of course we have to think about how we get people in. But at that longer-term, medium-term level, where we're thinking about the whole concept of how we say what aspiration is, how we tell our kids from more working-class backgrounds that you should read the same books as rich kids are reading, when they are doing their own political education or they're doing a Saturday job and they're learning about life in other ways, and that we don't see that as equal, if not more character building. And so over the medium to long term, you need to change that fundamentally. And what Oxford and Cambridge and other universities can do is to make sure that they are hiring the academics and giving the research, helping the research grants go to people that say that message.
I'm really glad that actually the rhetoric of aspiration, and I think later that actually social mobility has been called out, because I think that is something that plays a huge role, not just in rhetoric surrounding admissions and who applies, but actually once students from less privileged backgrounds get to Oxford. I think sometimes the impression I get from a lot of the working class students we've been working with setting up the new campaign has been that hearing that as a response to to why there are problems with access admissions from certain backgrounds once they get to Oxford, can make them feel like certain experiences, certain work, like you mentioned, has been devalued. I was going to also mention the issue of cultural capital and the fact that actually there are lots of different kinds of cultural capital. It's not just whether you have cultural capital or not, it's actually what kind of cultural capital you have and whether that is valued by society, the higher education system, certain universities and things. And I was wondering if there were kind of any thoughts from the panel about how we sort of intervene with those things, about the ideas of what constitutes aspiration, what constitutes social mobility, or why that might be an inherent good, and indeed what kinds of capital and cultural capital in particular the school system, the university system, and society more widely kind of values. So it's quite a big sort of question of lots of things. If anyone wants to kind of get their teeth stuck into that.
I'm happy to kick off again. So in terms of admissions to Oxford, which is a bit I can really focus on, cultural capital has to be linked to the subject you want to study. So it has to be how you can link that, what you're doing in your everyday life, and it's fully appreciated that some students do have to work, and that's really valuable. Work is valuable no matter who you are and what work it is. So that is recognised, it's not that we don't recognise it, but it's also about, so if you're doing physics, what else can you read? What else is available, whether it's a TED talk, you can look at that, can you assimilate it, can you look at what you've learned in class, whether it's a theory, physics, apply it. Some of that is challenging to do all by yourself, and it is recognised, even if we see some hints of that in the interview, then it's really, really useful for us to understand, and we can see the wider context in terms of the school that the person has come from or the background that comes from, to show that there is an inkling there. They can take on familiar things and they can turn it around and try and explain it. It isn't necessarily about getting the right answer in these interviews, it's about demonstrating how you're thinking. So it's about showing your potential. Cultural capital, I think, is one of those things that does make a difference whether you're applying to Oxford or anywhere else. So what more can the university sector do to share and to give information out that this might be worth reading, or this might be worth looking at, this might be worth analysing, and how can we work with teachers that can set that up, and not set it up just the day before the student is due to go in for an Oxford interview, but it's something I would dearly like to see integrated into schools at an earlier age. From year 7 or even primary school, how can we get young people to talk about their views? How can we get them to value education in a different way? It's not just about it's passing exams, it's not a burden, it's actually something that should be stretching your minds, it should be challenging you, it's something you should be engaging with. My challenge is how I can work with teachers to start embedding some of that in schools at an early age. The independent sector does it effortlessly. They've had years of practice of that, and they're very good at preparing students for interviews and things like that. What I would like to see is some of that coming into the average stage school. So my challenge is, how do we make that happen? How can I work with the teaching profession? What resources do we have at Oxford that we can share wider with schools that are on our doorstep, schools that are in the North East? And one of the things that we are playing with at the moment, and about to launch in September, is an online portal. It's almost like mini MOOCs, really, mini MOOCs for schools, where we've packaged information that our researchers have been working on, that our academics have been working on, and it's called Oxplore, and it's something we've designed in the form of big questions that take students outside of what they're doing in the classroom. But if they're passionate about ethics, philosophy, these questions will help them in terms of their cultural capital when it comes to subject areas, because that's what we're interested in.
I just like to say, in some of the activities that I run, particularly for year 9s, year 10s as well, what I'm very keen on is trying to encourage them to link their own context, their own life, their own interests with their academic interests as well, so that it's not just about reading around the subject that they're studying at school and adding bolt-ons with the supercurricular side of things, but it's actually looking at themselves and their own context. It could be the environment that they live in. You can link it geography, history, their interests, that sort of thing, and actually bringing part of themselves in as well. So I think that's an important side of what we're trying to do as well.
I agree. So when we're working with the students on Target Oxbridge, firstly the thing you have to do is to let them know that they must be reading, and that's not something that all of them are aware of, and it's not something that schools are always promoting. So as Samina said, ultimately it's about caring about your subject in whatever way you're most interested in it, but they're often not aware that they have to be doing more than what they're doing at school. They're getting good grades, they're on top of their work, and they think that's enough. And they come in for a first meeting with us, and we normally hand them a reading list and say, try to find something within this that you're passionate about and read that, or find something else to read. But what you're doing at the moment is good, but that's the base level that everyone has, and you have to now go and prove that you really care about this subject. And then there's a question of what should I read? And the students aren't often aware of where they can find these things to read. They're often not aware that reading lists are on the university websites. So it's often a case of just directing them to that so they have a starting point. But then also letting them know that if they find something genuinely interesting, they should just go and pursue that. And some of the students, particularly the ones who want to apply for politics or sociology related courses, are often very engaged. Some of them are blogging already. This younger generation, a lot of them are blogging, doing things online, doing their own writing and reading, and I encourage them to try and link that to their application, the things that they're reading about, often in very interesting class or gender or race. How can they link that with some of the other academic readings that are maybe on the lists that they've got, and put that into their personal statement, because that is a combination of their genuine personal interest with the academic reading that they've been doing. So I think it's a case of just allowing them to see that the things they care about are relevant to the academic world they're trying to enter. I think some of them think they must have read, the canon or the formal pieces that for them might be a little bit dry or apart from them. And what I say is, as long as it's linked to your subject and you can make it clear that it's relevant, you can do this, and it makes writing the personal statement much easier for them.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I don't disagree with any of this, but I would just say, it just seems so fundamental to me, given that so many people here do important jobs afterwards, we don't, this is the things that they care about, but also the people that they are and the lives that they've lived. And it strikes me from my time, it was a long time ago, this is going to totally give my age away right now, but when I was here, my friends from similar backgrounds, at that time we had quite strong East London accents, his tutor asked him why he sounded like Ali G. I mean, like, there was a lot of tutors that we had at that time that were like totally clueless. I mean, I guess, and I'm sure that's work that has been done over time, but I guess my question to you is, how much have we made sure that people that are interviewing these kids can understand wider ideas of what it is to have cultural capital, not just to question you on books, but to understand that lived experience is so important to who you become and how you will use your education here?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's about turning the mirror on Oxford itself, and something that I am working on internally here. So many of our academics are not from UK education systems, so they wouldn't recognise somebody from East London, or whether it's the North East or whatever. So they come in with their own perceived ideas of young people.
And I think it's worth saying that they're often from elite classes in those countries as well. I think that's
absolutely, I think you're right, yes. Yeah. I not denying that at all. But then we also do get a lot of tutors who are very much aware of and very passionate about the issues that we have been talking about. So one of the things as part of anybody who wants to do admissions here, we do have admissions training that every college is required to make sure that the new people who are new to undergraduate admissions do that. And as part of that, there is an unconscious bias component as well. We are working very, very hard with our Equality and Diversity unit to look at that unconscious bias component, and we all have already worked to update it because it says a few years old now. That is a face-to-face, and there's also a online portal aspect of it as well. So that is work we're doing because we recognise there is a massive need for that. It's really important that university, and particularly the colleges who are doing the undergraduate interviewing, are taking that forward and rolling it out across their college community. And it's not just important for admissions, it's important for everything that they do. They are, at the end of the day, working with people from very diverse backgrounds, whether it's international or home students, and they need to be aware of that. So that's the first step. The next step really is to start developing what we're calling race-aware training as well. So that's something is progressing too, and we want to pilot that before we take it out further and introduce it across the university. That's all work in progress.
And I think letting the public know that that sort of training is happening here will be really valuable. So a lot of the students that we work with are concerned that when they go to the interview, they'll be judged on the accent that they have, or the fact that they haven't been to the theatre before, so they haven't watched that play on the stage, and that they're worried that those sorts of things might rule them out or stand against them. And I think if they were aware that the university is investing a lot of time and energy in trying to ensure its staff have had unconscious bias training and are aware of these differences and won't be holding them against anybody, that might instill more confidence in students who, because they are worried, they're worried about coming and in their minds they're going to turn up and the interview will be with somebody who's not very nice, probably a very old white man, that's their image. And that was my image until I turned up when I had two very young, friendly tutors and my interview was on a sofa, and it was nothing that I expected, but they have this idea, and the process I know is built with more than one thing, and the interview isn't the only thing, but for the students, that's the thing that's most terrifying. And I think anything that can be done, and the videos that are out already are really good at demystifying it.
And I think we can do more.
Yeah, and I think anything to be clear that the tutors have had that training would be helpful.
Just because of we're in the last half an hour and I really want to take lots of questions from everyone in the room. One thing I want to ask about, so I think it's so relevant to access to Oxford and the intersection as well of race and class, is regional disparity, because I think that's a huge issue. When you look at where people coming to Oxford come from in the UK, it's hugely unequal. And then there's also an issue of the fact that the majority of our BME students do come from London. It's fantastic that we've got BME students coming to Oxford. We want more to come to Oxford, but should we be doing more to expand where these BME students are coming from? And what can we do about that? And what does that reveal, I suppose, about the intersection of race and class and educational opportunity? So again, I've probably said too many things all at once, but if anyone wants to kind of respond with any thoughts about that and how we might practically address that, as well as what some of the problems are, that would be fantastic.
So,
you don't have to go, but if you'd like to start.
I think race, disadvantage and regional are three key priorities, and they definitely are for me in terms of admissions. As you probably know, in terms of region, the majority of applicants we get are from the southeast. And when you look at the pools of 3A plus students from the north who are then applying to Oxford, there are more that could apply here, that probably are ruling themselves out for whatever reason, whether it's they feel they won't fit in, or they feel that it's too far from home, or maybe there is an equally good university that is satisfying their needs and they'd much rather go to Manchester, Sheffield, there are Leeds, etc., Durham, Edinburgh if you want to go further north. They'd rather do that than come to Oxford. And if that's their choice, then absolutely fantastic and best of luck to them. It may well be that there are courses that they want to do that we don't offer, like pharmacy, dentistry, vet science, so they may be going somewhere else. But I'm very keen to see more regional mix in terms of applications and who gets in. In terms of BAME communities, the largest BAME community, as Eden's already said, is in London. And when you look at the pool of 3A plus students, I think there are more in London who could apply to us, which goes slightly against what you said, Eden, but I would like to see more from London applying. I still want to sort of do more work there. I think the other BAME communities that are in the West Midlands or the East Midlands. West Midlands, we are getting a fair proportion from that 3A plus pool, and I know there's more we can do in terms of helping to widen that 3A plus pool. The other area where there are a large number of communities who aren't applying is the East Midlands. And coming from Leicester myself, my hometown, I'm sort of quite disappointed to realise there aren't more people from that area, Nottingham, Leicester, Lincolnshire, and sort of Yorkshire and Humber, who aren't applying more to us. And it's you know, what I'd like to do is much more about why they aren't applying. What are the barriers? Is it cultural, they don't want to leave home, or what is it that they aren't seeing all the benefits of applying to Oxford? So much more that we can do in that area.
Just really quickly again, we shouldn't be surprised that there's massive regional variations in who comes in, because there's massive regional inequalities, and this country has greater levels of inequality by where you live than the whole rest of the EU, including ex-communist Eastern European countries. I mean, I wish I had the graph to show you. So we shouldn't be surprised, but it's alarming. So I just had these stats. I gave to Channel 4 for something, and so Salford's the population of 220k, two people applied. I mean, but somewhere else like Bury, something like 180k population, 16 people applied, only 18% got in. You look at just boroughs in London, Richmond, Kingston upon Thames. 149 applications, 33% got in. I mean, when you look at them side by side like that, like, it's alarming. And again, this is about a problem that is beyond something that Oxford and Cambridge can sort out. Of course, they should do everything they can. But fundamentally, we need to be making a bigger picture about what we do on regional inequalities.
I think that's right. When I was at the Department for Education, it's something the department was aware of in terms of academic attainment varying massively by region, and that is something that the university on its own can't fix, but it's something that we should be looking to government and suggesting that government look at more strongly, and they have suggested at times that they are, but I think there's more that could be done. On top of that, I think there is something very important about people being able to see themselves here, and representation is important. So for any of the promotional materials that are going out from the university, ensuring that there is that representation of people from different regions will be important. I know that for the students I work with, being able to come here and meet with black students makes a big difference, because it breaks that myth that none of them are here. And when we set it up 5 years ago, that it felt quite revolutionary to do that, to bring them up and show them that there are black students here, and having students go back into schools is very important. And I think for regions that are further away, that's a harder bridge to gap to bridge, because there's the distance. But if the university can support students to come down and meet with students who come from a similar region, it does bust that myth. And if that's not easy, having students go back and maybe just going back to their local school and really being there to represent the fact that it can happen can help. But I think, as has been said, there is a wider societal issue that needs to be addressed as well.
Just a quick question for the panel, a bit more about this study. Is Oxford, as in the place itself, the town, the city itself, a challenge to this? So I'm just thinking, I used to work at Exeter, and Exeter University itself is something that is very, very white. It's something like 96% white. But Exeter, the city, is even more white. So it's difficult to, from their perspective, they would find it difficult to diversify the student cohort when it is a very remote location and a very white location. I'm trying to think, when I studied in London at school and then stayed there for university, and now I think about it, a lot of my non-white friends did stay in London for university. Is geography important in that respect?
I mean, my understanding is that the University of Oxford is much whiter than the city of Oxford. But I expect one of the issues we face is that the world's view of Oxford is of Oxford University. Often those two things are seen as synonymous. So actually it's much harder with messaging that.